Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Strategy and Resources Policy Committee meeting for Tuesday, the 26th of May, 2026. Just a couple of things to note. First of all, my name is Councillor Tony Dyer. I'm or hopefully will be when it gets confirmed, Chair of Strategy and Resources Committee. And Councillor Sarah Classett, so if you can just is the Vice Chair of Strategy and Resources Committee, but obviously part of this meeting is to confirm and note those appointments. Can I just remind everyone that this meeting is being webcasted, and also just to outline the emergency evacuation procedure. We're not expecting a fire test, so if the fire alarm does go off, please leave the room calmly. Go out via the lobby area through the main door, turn right at the top of the ramp. When you get to the bottom of the ramp, if you make your way to Bristol Cathedral, and then please await a fire officer to sign you off before leaving the area. If we move on to agenda item number 2, can I ask for apologies for absence and substitutions, Amy?
Yeah, so we've received apologies from Councillor Ellie King with Councillor Catcher-Hornchan as substitute.
Thank you, and welcome to the committee, Catcher. Agenda item number 3 is declarations of interest. Can I ask committee members if they have any interest to declare in relation to the items of business on the agenda? Councillor Blenkinsop.
It's a small matter, but in relation to the last item on the agenda, item 14, I am a proud and lifetime member of the Campaign for Real Ale, which is relevant to the business discussed.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, we move on to agenda item 4, which is minutes of the previous meeting. Before I move the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 13th of April, I'd like to propose a suggested amendment to the wording within the public forum item for clarity on the response to supplementary questions asked by Suzanne Audrey. The minutes extract currently reads, with regards to question 4, Suzanne Audrey asked what specific training is given to officers and members of the Planning Committee, particularly in relation to the decision-making process when members disagree with an officer's recommendation. It was clarified that all councillors receive up-to-date training. Furthermore, it was asked whether members receive independent advice on complex planning or whether they rely solely on officers' recommendation. I am proposing we add the following wording. In response to this supplementary question, it was confirmed that advice that was fully independent of the councillor was not provided to councillors in relation to planning matters. However, advice provided by regulatory officers was given in their capacity as regulatory officers of the planning authority. Do I have any objections to that being added to the minutes? Thank you. Can I therefore then move that the minutes of the previous meeting of the Strategy and Resources Committee held on the 13th of April 2026 as a correct record, subject to the amendment just outlined? Can I ask for a seconder?
Seconded.
All those in favour, please say aye. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 5, which is Chair's announcements. I do not have any Chair's announcements today. So we'll move on to agenda item number 6, which is public forum. Up to 30 minutes is available for public forum. I'd like to advise the committee that we have received 10 questions and 9 statements. Public forum has been circulated to the committee members and are published on the council's website alongside the agenda papers for this meeting. Each questioner is permitted to ask up to 2 oral supplementary questions in total if they wish. A supplementary question must arise directly out of the original question or the reply, i.e. an entirely fresh questions on other subjects are not permitted. Depending on the content of the supplementary questions, it may be necessary for a follow-up reply to be sent to the questioner. So if we move on to public questions, question number 1 is Susan Mayer, which is about what is the reason for 12-year delay in enforcing terms of a lease. Susan, do you have a follow-up question? Is Susan with us?
Some issues. Once again, Cottam seek to rewrite the terms of their 2011 lease. The entire area of land must be relinquished without delay or any concessions that Cottam may now be demanding. The school has fenced vast areas of the field and we have just a small area for any future equipment. The play park is not a negotiation tool to be manipulated when they had their chance in 2011. It's too late now to complain, so can we please have our play park?
Thank you, Susan. I'm going to be very careful how I respond to this because obviously there is some complex legal matters involved here. But what I'll say in general, and this may be in response to some of the other questions as well, 12 years is far too long a time for this to have been resolved and sorted. That's not acceptable. What I would say is that we will seek to resolve that as quickly as possible. I think in the response to questions here and others, we made it clear that the land does belong to Bristol City Council and we intend to take back possession of that land. I cannot give you an exact timeline for that, but 12 years is, as I said, unacceptable. What I would say is Councillor Gillandris, who represents Stoke Bishop Ward, will be ensuring very much that I keep my word on making sure we resolve this as quickly as possible. And I suspect John will want me to complete it in 12 hours as possible, certainly not 12 years.
Went out in 2014 and it's supposed to have been released within 3 months of this opening and we're still waiting.
That's okay, but I think no, it's difficult for me to take responsibility for actions that should have been done long before pretty much any of us in this chamber who are currently elected were elected. All I can say is we will look to rectify the situation under this administration as soon as possible. As I said, it's a legal matter. I'm not going to go into the detail, but I've been assured that it is now under action and has been taken place. Okay, further questions is, I think, Suzanne, you have questions 5, 6 and 7. Do you have any supplementary questions?
I've just got one in the sense that will the new reporting, will we see that in July? Will that be the first time that we get that information?
Do you know the answer?
I'm sure we've got to implement revised guidance. So
Right. Suzanne, it looks like I'm going to have to get you a written answer to that. I think we have to implement the revised guidance, and I just think we're looking at what the timeline will be to get that implemented so that the information we provide is accurate.
Okay, and just to save you asking me about a statement, I just wanted to say thank you to whoever responded to my questions. It's really a good answer, a thorough answer, and I was absolutely delighted to receive it. So thank you very much. I know you don't like to name officers, but whoever it was, thank you.
Thank you, Susan. I'll pass that on to the relevant officer. We now have questions 9 and 10, which is from Shirley Brown. Is Shirley here? Do you have a follow-up question, Shirley?
I have a follow-up question to question 9 about the persistent breach of the terms of the lease. I thank you for your answer, albeit very disappointing. My understanding is that conditions that a lease is subject to are legally enforceable. How can a freeholder not be entitled to take legal action to enforce specific conditions? Surely the phrase subject to in this special clause makes the tenant's rights and preferences subordinate to the rights of and use by the community. It is not Cottam's privilege to allow public access, as you write in your answer. It is the council's responsibility to enforce the lease. Will this committee share the specific source and wording of our legal advice in order to clarify how and why the provisions of the lease are not legally enforceable? or will this be another referral to privileged information reminiscent of the questionable confirmation that the playing fields on the Stoke Lodge estate are not within the curtilage of the Grade 2 listed house? In which case, will you at least explain why the council repeatedly favours Cottam School's aggressive appropriation of land which had been used and amicably shared for decades? Or was that special clause inserted to lull us into a false sense of security about ongoing access to the last open green space in Stoke Bishop? Now, sadly, usually we're locked out, as you well know. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you managed to wrap in multiple questions into that single follow-up question, so well done. As I said earlier on, because of the legal nature of this and the legal advice, I will look to provide written answers because I don't want to say anything that may prejudice the outcome that we are looking to achieve.
May I then submit my text to Democratic Services?
Democratic Services would already have received it, but if you want to send follow-up information,
Follow-up. They won't have received the follow-up.
yes, you certainly can. Okay, we'll now move on to public statements. And public statement number 1 is from Susan. Susan, do you want to read out your public statement?
The issue about Stoke Lodge Play Park on the agenda item for the next meeting, please.
Unfortunately, we cannot because there is a restriction, and I'm not quite sure what you're asking for the agenda item. Can I ask, was that in your public statement?
I wanted to be put on the agenda to be discussed at the next meeting.
Yeah, sorry, Susan. I think there's a bit of confusion here. What I was asking you to do was to read out your statement that you've submitted.
The first one.
Okay, thank you. In that case, we'll move on to statement number 7, which is Steve Sayers.
So the statement really outlines the case for investing some strategic SIL into community infrastructure in the city. If you look over the last 13 years, the SIL has been going, about between 7 and 10% has gone into community infrastructure rather than roads and flood defence kind of stuff. City Council and the community sector have worked really well together, I think, on the whole. I mean, there's the odd imperfection, but generally speaking, I think we do work well together. And most recently, we've worked with the City Council on reviewing the community asset transfer policy, which has been absolutely fantastic kind of process, really. We're really pleased with that. So what we're looking for really is for the committee to bear in mind the need for community infrastructure as well as roads and flood defences, essential as they are, that you can find funds for those in other places, and to really invest in community infrastructure when you're doing new development, because it's really going to help win hearts and minds, put neighbourhoods into livable places. That's the community infrastructure is what makes a difference to how people feel about where they live. It will really help to create inclusive, more cohesive communities.
Thanks, Steve. Suzanne, do you want to read out your statement?
Just thank you to the officer for actually supplying the information. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Suzanne. And then statement number 9 is Councillor Kerry Bowes, Councillor Kirsty Tate and Councillor Paul Gargan about the Pride in Place. Paul, do you want to read out your statement?
No, that's fine.
All right. Okay, thank you. Just to remind everyone that all questions and statements have been made available to all members of the committee. And while I have said we will follow up with written questions, we'll get those sent to you as soon as possible. Written answers, sorry. We'll get those sent to you as soon as possible. Okay, we'll now move on to agenda item number 7, which is the annual business report for 2026-2027. I'd like to advise the committee that the purpose of this report is to note arrangements for the Strategy and Resources Policy Committee for the 2026-2027 municipal year. This report is for information only, and I'd like to invite Amy Wadwell, Policy Committee Coordinator, to briefly outline the report. Amy.
Thank you, Chair. So, as mentioned, this is just a short report to note the arrangements for the committee for this municipal year. So, first up, it's for the committee to note the membership of this committee for the next municipal year, which is unchanged from the previous. It's also to note Councillor Dyer as the chair of the committee and Councillor Classic as the vice chair. It's also to note the terms of reference of the policy committee, which is as outlined in the constitution and copied into the report also. And then to note the meeting dates for the next municipal year as well. And then finally to note the arrangements for the finance subcommittee, which is a standing committee, subcommittee for this committee. And the chair of that is Councillor Patrick McAllister, and vice chair is Councillor Jonathan Hucker. And the terms of reference are also outlined in the report as outlined in the constitution. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any comments or questions? Okay, in that case, can I ask members of the committee to note the recommendations, which Amy has read out very clearly, so I don't have to again. So can I take that as noted? Thank you very much. We now move on to agenda item number 8, which is city-to-city time-limited partnership memorandum of understanding agreements between Bristol and Odesa in Ukraine and Bristol and Speightstown in Barbados. This report aims to raise awareness and seek comments from Strategy and Resources Policy Committee in relation to the proposed signing of 2 new city-to-city time-limited partnership memorandum of understanding agreements between Bristol and Odesa, and also separately between Bristol and Speightstown. This is part of Bristol City Council's international outreach and collaboration supported through our international strategy. The report is for information only, and I also like to note that an updated version of Appendix A2 was published as a supplement to the main report's pack, with minor changes to Article 2 following further updates from the City of Odesa. I would like to invite Deborah Kinghorn, International Affairs Officer, and Matilda Kay, International Affairs Lead, to briefly outline the report. Matilda and Deb.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, councillors. In recent years, the Council has seen growing interest in international collaboration from both local communities here in Bristol and from cities around the world looking to connect with us. Bristol currently has 7 long-standing formal twinning agreements. However, given limited resources and a desire to ensure impact, our approach has evolved. Current practice is now focused on targeted, flexible partnerships through international networks, funded programs, learning exchanges, and where appropriate, time-limited memorandum of understanding. Within this context, we received initial requests to explore twinning with 2 cities, Odesa in Ukraine and Speightstown in Barbados. In response, we undertook further research and extensive engagement with local diaspora communities, national government partners, and the leadership of both cities. What emerged was the value of a focused, time-bound approach centered on shared priorities, practical collaboration, and clear local benefit. This work has helped shape the draft agreements, and the detail of this is referenced in the report, page 6, paragraph 1. On this basis, we are proposing 2 separate 3-year memoranda of understanding, establishing each as a partner-city relationship. Upon signing, we anticipate these agreements would run from summer 2026 to 2029, subject to final approval, and would be delivered in partnership with city stakeholders and community groups, supported by dedicated Friends of networks. Our connection to Odesa has grown in recent years, particularly following the increase in Ukrainian residents in Bristol after the start of the war. The request to build a partnership came from the local community and from the city of Odesa. Odesa is Ukraine's 3rd largest city. It is a major port on the Black Sea and both a UNESCO World Heritage City and a UNESCO Creative City. Following further research, Odesa was the most aligned to Bristol, another port city with rich cultural identity, strong creative economy, and clear opportunity for meaningful exchange. This relationship also sits within a wider national context, with UK cities building partnerships with Ukrainian counterparts as part of a long-term support through the UK-Ukraine 100-year partnership agreement. The proposed MOU would focus on shared learning, cultural collaboration, and practical exchange, grounded in both solidarity and mutual respect. Alongside that, the Speightstown represents a very different but equally important connection. Speightstown in Barbados offers a deeply rooted historical link. Dating back to the 17th and 18th centuries, the links between our two port cities were so strong, particularly through the sugar trade, that Speightstown became known as Little Bristol, a name still used today. More recently, relationships have been renewed through the work by the Council and partners on legacy and memorialisation, particularly around the history of transatlantic trafficking and enslaved Africans. Through this engagement, and with support from the British High Commission, the Government of Barbados approached Bristol to explore the formal partnership. Today, Speightstown is an important tourism hub, with plans to develop a heritage and cultural centre that will tell a fuller and more inclusive story of its history, including its links to Bristol. Looking ahead, there are also strong shared priorities, from sustainable and inclusive economic development to climate resilience, education, and creative industries. This proposed MOU reflects both our shared history and forward-looking commitment to collaboration, establishing Speightstown as a partner city and strengthening links not only between our cities, but also across wider UK-Caribbean partnerships and diaspora communities. Taken together, today we are presenting these proposed memoranda of understanding for noting. They represent a more focused and modern approach to international partnership, time-limited, collaborative, and rooted in both community engagement and clear areas of shared value. They have been developed through extensive engagement with partners and communities, ensuring they reflect both local priorities and global opportunity. I'll now hand over to Debs, who will briefly outline the development process and highlight the key elements of each agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Matilda. Good afternoon, councillors. So you will have seen an outline summary of each proposal set out in the main report. That's on page 5, with the full content of the draft agreement set out in appendices A1 and A2. As Matilda's highlighted, each is focused on a few key areas of collaboration that align to our shared priorities and local benefit, alongside shared national and global objectives. This includes for Bristol and Odesa, aligning with the other UK cities' support for Ukraine under the UK-Ukraine 100-year partnership agreement, and including sustainable, social and cultural placemaking, recognising our shared UNESCO creative city sectors and support for positive health and well-being, including youth and community engagement, both currently and looking forward post-conflict. For Bristol and Speightstown, we're looking at shared learning and storytelling on cultural heritage and legacy, youth and education, and sustainable and inclusive economy. Both Bristol and Barbados, as you may know, are known for their key contributions to action on climate, for example. There's also an opportunity to connect and build on these strands as part of our wider Caribbean links, which we recognise are a key part of Bristol. Some of the key areas of value to Bristol include the opportunity for our children and young people to further develop their cross-cultural understanding as part of global citizenship initiatives, access opportunities to develop international friendships and shared learning, building on our current work and wider opportunities, and building further opportunity and resilience, for example, in the social impact economy and shared action on climate and sustainable development to support our communities. With that in mind, and in conclusion, we welcome any comments from the committee on the proposal ahead of a final decision under delegated authority by appropriate senior officer. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Before I open it out for comments and questions, I just want to say a couple of things myself. First of all, in regards to the terminology that we're using, memorandum of understanding doesn't really roll off the tongue. So our proposal is We have 7 cities that are twin cities. What we are proposing is that Odesa and Speightstown are recognised as partner cities with Bristol. I think that terminology better reinforces what it is we're trying to do. We are looking to work in partnership with Odesa and Speightstown for the greater good of both Bristol and our partner cities. Second thing is in relation to Speightstown. We do have a large Afro-Caribbean heritage population in the city who have long contributed to both the culture, heritage, and indeed the politics of this city. And we are a city that is still coming to terms with our history. That history has not always been something that we could be proud of. And by reaching out and establishing a partner city relationship with Speightstown, and particularly through them with the University of the West of Indies, we hope to further improve but also recognise our historical connections. Thirdly, Odesa has also come to terms with some of its heritage and history. In many ways, here in Britain, we have been, if we're honest with ourselves, we have been the imperialists. Ukraine has been the victim of imperialism of a different kind and continues to be today. Ukraine is looking forward, still, whilst at war, is looking to its future as an independent country, having managed to maintain and enhance its culture and its language despite decades, if not centuries, of attempts to eradicate that heritage and that language. And I'm proud that we are recognising that partnership moving forward with Odesa and with Speightstown. And finally, on the subject of Odesa, I'd like to particularly thank Councillor Paul Goggin for his work on this. He has worked tirelessly to improve and connect with Odesa, and also representatives of the Ukrainian community in the public gallery, both for the sunflowers that have appeared in Bristol in various places, but also for your continuing support, both for your home country, but also for your adopted city as well. We are proud to be a city with thousands of Bristolian West Indians, including Bajans, and also a city with a large population of Bristol Ukrainians. You are Bristolians, but you are also part of your own country still. Do I have any other questions or comments on this matter before we move on? Tom.
So a couple of points, really. First is more or less to agree with most of, or indeed all of what you've just said. I think that it's a fantastic contribution for us to work in partnership with both Odesa and Speightstown. I was more informed with regards to Odesa, with a certain individual sitting somewhat behind me who has told me a lot about his work there, and I think it has been some truly valuable work. From what I understand, Odesa is a city much like Bristol in many respects, with a proud cosmopolitan history, a lot of contribution to culture and the arts. So I think it's really valuable that we're working with them in particular. I do take the point as well, and our history when it comes to Africa and the Caribbean is not always something we can be proud of as Bristolians. But in doing this, we are doing something that I think we can be proud of. And I share your enthusiasm for those of that background who've contributed to our city's politics. So I thank you for bringing that forward. I suppose I'd just finish by saying that I support this without reservation, and thank the officers for all their hard work on it.
Any other questions, comments? Patrick.
Thank you, Chair. I'll second everything that's just been said. Thank you to the officers for all your hard work on this. I think it's an excellent set of proposals. I am just curious about how we will actually, how will we bring about some practical impacts of this, given that there is a huge amount of money attached to it? it's not a full twinning arrangement, how will we make good on these MOUs and meaningfully translate them into opportunities for children to engage in cross-cultural learning, for instance, or a wider appreciation of heritage?
Thank you. So the MOU sets out the framework, and we'll work with city partners and stakeholders to develop that framework and the activities around that. The MOU comes with an officer who will support that, and we will be applying for funding and through city partners. We have a long history of our twinning work, which works similarly as well through city partners and collaborating.
Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank the officers and partners and those who've lobbied for this. I think it's a welcome development. It's heartbreaking what's going on in Ukraine, and I think this, in some respects, is such a positive thing to do in a world where there's not much internationalism going on at the moment. I think we can all learn a lesson about actually reaching out and understanding cultures a bit more than what's outside our front door. I think there's, obviously there's some practical concerns about how we engage with a city that's, been subject to war, basically. So, but I just think that it's a great development and certainly really positive for the future. And let's hope that that positive future comes around a bit quicker than we hope.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay. In that case, sorry, Catherine, do you? No, sorry, I just saw you lean forward. So, thank you for your comments. And obviously, this is the first step. Now, as approval, we move forward. I imagine that at some point we'll do something which is a bit more ceremonial and may include people coming to Bristol. Sorry, councillors, do not get your hopes up. We are not going to Barbados on a jolly. As long as you don't take your council IT with you. I mean, Paul's the expert on what you can do and what you can't do at the moment. So I'd like for the Committee for Strategy and Resources, one, to note on the proposal to establish 2 new city-to-city time-limited partnerships, memorandum of understanding agreements between Bristol and Odesa and between Bristol and Speightstown as part of Bristol City Council's international outreach and collaboration to be established in the summer of 2026. Although it feels like summer already, so it could be tomorrow. To note the following feedback that has been given from this committee. The final decision will be made by an appropriate officer under the scheme of the delegations. Can I ask the committee, therefore, to note the report as per the recommendations? Can I take that as noted? Thank you all very much. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Okay, we'll now move on to agenda item 9, which is transformation funding for 2026 and 2027, and the portfolio quarterly update. I'd like to advise the committee that this report is seeking approval to the revenue reserve funding for the 2026-2027 transformation portfolio of up to 12.3 million, and the carry forward of approved but unspent 25-26 funding of 5.3 million, and to note the updated governance and funding arrangements. This is a key decision because it involves a spend of over 500,000 and impacts more than 2 wards. I would like to invite Tara Dillon, Head of Service Portfolios, who isn't here. Oh, there you are. Sorry, Tara. I was looking over that direction for some reason. Sorry, Tara. So I'd like to invite Tara Dillon, Head of Service Portfolios, Programmes and Projects, to briefly outline the report. Tara.
Thank you, Chair. So this paper is fundamentally about making sure the Council has clear and realistic funding for the year ahead, so we can keep moving forward with the major change and transformation work that matters most. It's asking committee to approve the funding needed for the 26-27 transformation portfolio, to approve the carry forward of funding already agreed but not spent last year, and to note the latest position on progress, governance and delivery. So there are two main points that I'd like to highlight. Firstly, on last year's position, in 25-26, the Council approved a larger funding envelope than was ultimately needed. This wasn't because work didn't happen. In many cases, programmes and projects progressed well, but as plans became more developed, spending was spread more realistically across a longer period. Some projects started later than expected, and in a few cases, we secured funding from alternative sources. So the result wasn't a loss of momentum, but a more accurate picture of what was needed in year. This means that some of that funding already approved and will now carry forward into 26-27 to support delivery already underway. This includes building on significant recurring savings of 22.6 million achieved in 25-26, as well as wider benefits for residents and particularly those through work linked to housing, homelessness and social care. The second point I'd like to make in this paper is around our funding sources. So an important change this year is that the portfolio is less reliant on flexible use of capital receipts to fund delivery. This is a positive step. It means we're moving to a more sustainable funding position with funding from approved revenue budgets first, then transformation reserves, ahead of considering flexible use of capital receipts, and therefore creating less dependence on future asset disposals to support this work. In practice, that gives us a firmer footing for delivery, more certainty in planning, and a clearer link between the Council's priorities and how we fund change needed to deliver them. It also helps to reduce risk. We're less reliant on receipts that may vary in timing or value, and we're in a stronger position to keep momentum in the portfolio and make decisions with greater confidence. In that vein, we are asking committee to approve up to 12.3 million for the 26-27 portfolio, along with the carry forward of 5.3 million of previously approved funding. This funding will allow us to continue to deliver a set of priority programmes and projects already in train, while also creating room for a number of new priorities. These are pieces of work that need coordinated efforts across the organisation and are important to both service improvement and the Council's wider financial resilience. This report also makes a distinction that not every important project sits within this transformation funding request. Other valuable work will continue across the organisation through different routes and funding arrangements. What this paper does focus on is the work that most clearly needs corporate prioritisation, oversight and delivery support. A further point worth drawing out is the proposed changes to the internal funding model for programme and project support. From this year, we're moving away from routinely recharging directorates for their support. That will retain a clear picture for the true cost of change through time recording, but it reduces our internal processes, helps us direct support to where it's needed first, and with greatest priority. Finally, the paper also provides the committee with the latest quarterly update of the live portfolio, so members can see where progress is being made, what's coming next, and how this work will be managed. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. Open it up for questions and comments. Catcher and then Patrick.
Yes, I was in some of this transformation program, I'm quite aware of, and sitting on the Children and Young People's Committee, the Families First or Stable Homes, and some of the work they've done is truly very good, and I can understand the way it's happening and the way it's proceeding and how the projects are going, and they seem to be doing quite well. What are we concerned about is the Adult Social Care Transformation Improvement Programme. I've sat on one committee and I've tried to read some of the papers and notes to try and match up with what I'm experiencing through casework and also just generally of people that live in Bristol, of what their experience of adult social care is. And the two don't match up. And the whole thing to me seems very opaque, and how do we know they're not just outsourcing and I do know this happens because I've experienced this, the lower standards of work and provision and all those kinds of things when they do outsource, which looks cheaper on the books, but it doesn't do the job that it's needed to do. And I've known this from different types of adult social care. I've been hearing different things. So this lack of transparency is really worrying for us. That's my comment, really. Because it seems lack of transparency in adult social care.
Steph, do you?
Thank you for your question, Councillor. We note that the Adult Social Care Transformation Programme, as was, is coming to a close. There is some work on the new programmes within that area, and I believe that reports on that will be coming to the Adult Social Care Committee in due course, where hopefully there'll be that greater detail and transparency that you're seeking.
And Nate, do you want to come in?
Thank you. And just to add to that, I wasn't 100% sure whether your concerns were specifically in relation to the transformation programme or adult social care more broadly, which is obviously a very significant service. Our largest amount of budget spend is upon adult social care services, so it's very broad and very diverse. One of the things I would reflect is that one of the benefits of having a committee system is that there is a committee that's sole remit is to focus on adult social care. So that does actually enable greater transparency than perhaps you would have if it was just reports coming to a cabinet system. So I would hope that through the Adult Social Care Committee there is transparency, but happy to take offline if there's anything that you would like us to specifically respond to you about.
Patrick.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll echo what Katja was saying. I think this is some excellent work that's being done here in transformation, and it's not often we get good news reports, really, but this really did feel like a good news report. The savings that we're finding, the improvements in service delivery, especially for vulnerable children, I found that really heartening, and there are still challenges ahead. But I think the direction of travel is incredibly positive. But speaking of the challenges ahead, I do have a few questions on some of the specifics, if that's all right, please. On the Bristol Waste Transformation Programme, I think the relocation of the Albert Road depot, I would really welcome some more information on that at some point, please. Maybe a briefing for members. It's a huge project with very big financial and environmental implications, as well as for service delivery across the whole city. I personally would welcome being a bit more informed about its implications and feasibility. On the housing IT programme, I know that this IT rollout was hardly unique across, well, anywhere really, in having quite delays and cost overruns and so on. But I can ask what lessons have been learned from that to try and mitigate those happening again in the future. On the neighbourhood prevention model section of the report, this may have just been me, but I found it to be quite heavy in jargon at that point, if I may, and I appreciate that's partly because I don't specialise in this area myself, but I hope that we are being sure that public comms in this area are a bit more accessible and written to be understood by the majority of people. Those points aside, thank you very much for the work you're doing, and long may it continue.
So certainly I can take those points back and make sure that those briefings are arranged, and also to note that the neighbourhood prevention piece of work will be coming through committee in due course as well, so it's just building up its proposition to bring to you shortly.
Kelvin.
So I want to make a broader point first about this whole programme. For me, this should be owned by the administration. This is the administration's essentially plan to kind of release savings in the areas that it wants to focus on, to be able to kind of shape the organisation as it wants to shape. So there are a lot of good stuff in here, so, but there's lots of potential further reports that could cause us some political problems in it as well. And I think, so let me pick one example on adult social care, the direct payments hub. We've been asking about putting pressure on doing more on direct payments because we're low in the core cities, and there's been some, not resilience, but it's been like kind of trudging through treacle to get there, if I'm being honest with you, and I don't know what that report's going to say yet. If it says we're going to go after more direct payments, we're going to put the authorities' pressure under it behind that, then great. But currently it doesn't say, I haven't got a report. So I'm struggling, and there's a number of reports in this where we've got outcomes to be delivered, right? And I think that means it, particularly for an opposition party, makes me nervous that signing this through, putting our hands up for this, essentially is waving through savings that might be unacceptable further down the line. Just a point on adult social care. But bear in mind there's lots of good stuff in it as well, right? So I recognise that there's a balance to be struck. On adult social care, given that I was vice chair of adult social care for a long period of time, it's disappointing, and I've been pushing for a number of task and finish groups on key areas, and we've had sort of resilience to that, and it's met the least, I think, out of all our committees. I think it has the lightest agendas in all our committees. I personally think, Nick, I think it's a job for the leadership to really have a good look at adult social care and understand. Now, I'm going to give it there's one caveat to this. Some of the reports where other core cities get them, they go to Public Health and Communities Committee. So it is slightly fragmented here, I get that. But other cities can send the same report around a couple of committees for feedback, and we haven't tended to do that. So I think personally, on adult social care, it needs looking at. That's a separate issue, really, to I think what is a decent report, but there's too many for an opposition party. There's too many potential issues that in signing up to this wholeheartedly, we would put ourselves in a difficult position moving forward.
Ned, do you want to make a comment?
I just wanted to ensure that the committee was clear that what you're looking at today is the overall portfolio and the funding for the transformation portfolio, because that is a remit of Strategy and Resources Committee. What we're not asking you to do today is to agree the business cases for each individual programme within the portfolio. They will come to the relevant policy committee. So I understand what you're saying, Councillor, but I just wanted to make sure that was clear. And in relation to the wider comments about Adult Social Care Committee, happy to take that away and reflect on that and to reflect on the agendas. Of course, please also feed those into the work programme setting meetings, the workshops that we have with councillors, which helps to set the agenda for what comes to committees. I think there's also something to consider about not only what goes to Adult Social Care Committee, what goes to Public Health and Communities Committees, but also what goes to the ICB and what goes to the Health and Wellbeing Board, which collectively look at both the health and social care systems. So we'll take that away and give that some consideration. Thank you.
I am going to respond because I think there does mean, this is not the Adult Social Care Committee, this is the Strategy and Resources Committee. And what I would say is under the previous system, we had situations where we had 27, 29, 30 different reports all coming to one cabinet meeting and often going through without almost question. And I think there has to be some acceptance at least that in this system, all parties are representatives on every policy committee and have an opportunity to raise matters and to put forward amendments, which was not the case under the previous system. Now, I think the transformation programme was something that was started under the previous administration. We've taken it forward, we've evolved it. It's now demonstrating the move forward. I would say one of the key things from this report, which has been commented on before and is in many ways a direct response to concerns brought up by members of this committee, which is to move away from being reliant on the disposal of public assets to fund the transformation programme. Frankly, I think that's one of the biggest wins that we have delivered since May 2024, that we are no longer obliged or feel obliged in order to meet a target to dispose of assets. There will be occasions where we will dispose of assets, particularly if we identify that there was a better way of using them elsewhere in the public sector, either in different areas of the council, such as adult social care or children's services, or by working with our registered providers to bring forward and homes and specially supported homes. So I think my general overview of this is a good result. I think putting the funding in to carry on with the transformation programme, obviously each of us has to work according to our feeling about that funding, but I would generally say that this is a positive report. The direction of travel is a vast improvement on where we were before. Some of that is because of additional funding being made available. Some of it, and I would say probably majority, is because of additional controls we put in allow us to ensure that we're not overly dependent on asset disposal. And I think that's something that most Bristolians would be happy to see, that we are not selling off assets, because once sold, they're gone forever. Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, in that case, there is one item for approval and several items for noting. So I am going to move that the Committee for Strategy and Resources approve the Transformation Fund 2026-2027 Transformation Portfolio and the carry forward of approved but unspent funding from 25-26. Can I have a seconder for that?
Seconded.
Thank you, sir. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Thank you. All those against, please show your hands. All those abstaining, please show your hands. So that's 6 votes in favour, none against, and 3 abstentions. We then have 5 items to note, so I'll read these out all together and then ask the committee to note. So, to note the definition of transformation for the 26-27 portfolio and where requirement is needed to seek Transformation Board approval to secure transformation resource, funding and or capacity. Note where non-transformation funding is secured, approvers will follow the Council's scheme of delegations. Note the new funding model for the internal provision of programme and project management transformation capacity to the portfolio. Note the Executive Director of Resources, Section 151 officer, can amend the approved programme of works and funding allocations in year as necessary. And finally, note the progress update of the key priority transformation initiatives. Can I take those items as noted? Thank you. Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Steph. We now move on to agenda item number 10, which is acceptance of the funds and programme for the Pride in Place programme. I'd like to advise the committee that this report seeks approval to accept the Pride in Place programme and up to £20 million in associated government funding, comprising 37% revenue, or 7.17 million, and 63% capita, 12.43 million, from the 1st of April 2026. This is a key decision because it involves a spend of 500,000, and I would like to invite Penny German, Head of Service Communities, to briefly outline the report. Penny.
Hello, thank you. So Pride in Place is a fixed, non-competitive grant from the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government for 10 years from April 2026. Harcliffe is one of 169 areas across the UK to be awarded funding as part of Phase 2 of the Pride in Place programme. Pride in Place is intended to create the foundations for long-term transformation in neighbourhoods that experience the greatest inequity. It seeks to give communities the power, resource and tools to drive change and shape their neighbourhoods for the better. There are 3 strategic objectives: stronger communities, which is about connection and cohesion, building thriving places by addressing neighbourhood neglect, empowering communities to take back control. Community leadership will mean that local people are making the decisions supported by the local authority. A neighbourhood board will make the decisions about how the programme is delivered and how funding is spent, with the local authority acting initially as the accountable body. This means the council provides oversight, completes all the monitoring returns, and is legally responsible for financial stewardship and reporting to MHCLG. The board must be chaired by someone independent of the local authority. In April, Paul Smith was recruited by a panel of local people, the local MP and deputy leader of the council. The board will need to work with the local community and key stakeholders to develop a 10-year vision to be submitted to government in November. The key milestones are linked to are in the Appendix A. Reflecting the purpose and ethos of the programme, Bristol City Council established a community working group to get the process underway, and we're very grateful to the residents and community partners who have freely given their time to this. It's been a really positive start to the programme. From the start, there's been feedback from local people that the boundary proposed by MHCLG does not reflect the neighbourhood, and it's felt to be divisive. The working group agreed to consult local people on a revised boundary. Residents led a consultation about this, resulting in over 500 conversations, including 121 young people. The majority of people favoured an increase to the programme boundary to cover the wider Hartcliffe and Withywood area, which is recognised by local people, and the details are in the appendix. And I should say that the majority of people who were spoken to live in the original proposed area. This proposed new boundary also aligns with emerging opportunities of business in the community, pride of place, and neighbourhood health initiatives. The recruitment of the neighbourhood board is underway, taking into account this proposed new boundary, whilst appreciating this new boundary is still to be agreed by MHCLG. The design and the recruitment of the board has been led by the community working group, and they've given careful consideration to the board membership so that it's inclusive of different experiences and communities, and that's listed in paragraph 8. Achieving long-term change will require a proactive and collaborative approach by the City Council to identify opportunities, align and lever in resources, and find new ways to work with local people which build respect and trust. The views and experience of local people will be at the heart of the approach. And fortuitously for the community and for the programme, 2 years ago, a group of forward-thinking residents decided to work on a community plan for the area. This was very positive, proactive, and a hopeful step in a difficult climate. The Ignite survey reflects the experiences and priorities of 850 residents, and provides the foundation for a community plan. There's also a project underway to ensure the experience and views of young people are at the heart. This will be a grant pass-through. Bristol City Council, as the accountable body, will be responsible for ensuring the funds are properly managed. The management will transition to a community-led model by year 3 of the programme. And reflecting the strategic ambition of the programme, the project team in the City Council reflects a one council approach, with the Executive Director for Growth and Regeneration as strategic lead and Head of Communities in Adults and Communities responsible for the budget and day-to-day work. We anticipate further government guidance will continue to inform the development and delivery of the programme. And a report updating on progress and the 10-year vision will be presented to this committee in early 2027. And then the recommendations are about approving the acceptance of the programme and delegating responsibility to the Executive Director for Growth and Regeneration. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny. Before I open it up for questions, obviously I've never made any secret, because I'm always being very proud to say that I'm from Hartcliffe and I was born and grew up in the area. I don't know if I mentioned that before. However, I do not live in Hartcliffe and Withywood anymore. And I was not elected to represent Hartcliffe and Withywood. I live in Southfield and I represent Southfield Ward. I do, however, as leader of the council, have certain levels of responsibility. But the key thing of this is that the decisions on this have to be driven by the local community. Those you are still involved in Artcliffe and Willywood at most closer level than I have. And that includes the part of Artcliffe which is in Councillor Classett's ward as well. If you live in Artcliffe, you don't recognise the artificial boundaries that have been drawn up to help us elect councillors. And let's be honest about it, those boundaries could be changed very soon by the time we get to the next election anyway. We have to wait for the Electoral Commission to make that decision. So this is something that has to be driven by the local community. And even if I would be taking a deep interest, and even if I wasn't, given that so many of my family still live in Artcliffe, I'm pretty certain that I'll be getting stuff in my inbox whether I wanted it or not. It is a brilliant opportunity for Artcliffe and for the wider area, which is amongst the 1% most deprived areas in the country, not just in the city. And I look forward to this being a success. And I hope all of us, regardless, and I'm sure this is the case, is regardless of our party affiliations, recognise that this is a massive opportunity to make a difference to a part of the city that has been neglected for far, far too long. Tom.
I'll begin by agreeing with that last part. I do recognise, though obviously I don't necessarily have the personal connections to the area that you do, but I do recognise deprivation, like my own ward, like other wards in the city. We're one of the most unequal cities in the country in some respects, and this is a fantastic opportunity that's been delivered by, and I will be a little bit party political. We have been getting more funding from this Labour government. We've gotten it to the council directly, and we're getting it here in Pride in Place. I think it is important that we recognise that it is an opportunity for, as we say, sorely deprived local communities. We've got here over and our neighbours in Bath and Twerton, which is in a similar position of being a pocket of intense deprivation in somewhere that's normally considered more affluent. And it's a huge opportunity to kind of reset things. But on that point, and I think it is a point where residents could use some reassurance, I'm just noting this, looking at the finance advice with regards to the council will have responsibility for ensuring public funds are distributed fairly and effectively. And there is a sense of concern, I would say, among some residents that's been conveyed to me, that this money will be instead of council opportunities, that they will get this money and then the council will say, well, that's the job done then. We don't need to give them anything more. I am very sure that's not the case, but I think it would help if we set that out explicitly on the record that this will be in addition to any council funds and will not replace council funding, or vice versa.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Before I go on to Sarah, I am going to respond because I think it is good, and we should acknowledge that this money is coming from a Labour government, and we should also acknowledge that neglect in Artcliffe has not just suddenly happened overnight. It's something that's been going on for many decades, and Artcliffe has been let down by multiple governments of all colours. And we need to recognise that, yes, it's good we're getting this money. We should have been getting money like this a lot longer ago, and not just in Artcliffe, but in other places as well. And we have had some funding. So Fieldwood has received some funding, even under the previous Conservative government. I hope the way this works, because it's involving local people, will have long-lasting effects going on for a lot longer. But I think all of us, and I'll go back to your point about, this funding cannot be used. In fact, it does say very clearly it cannot be used to replace funding that was already identified for projects in the area. But we, in terms of getting additional funding into South Worcester in general, and Artcliffe in particular, it's not just the council that needs to make that commitment, it's also the government that needs to make that commitment, because there are other opportunities come up to bring more funding in. But I take your point, but I think we have to recognise this is something that has been 50 years and more in the making, not just the last 2 or even 10 years. Councillor Classett. Sorry, I'll come back to you in a minute, Tom.
Thank you, Councillor Dyer. Yeah, I just wanted to say, because obviously as one of the councillors that forms up part of it, I've obviously had the privilege of being on the working group that has got the project to this stage, and I really want to thank Penny and the other officers that have been involved in it so far. Terry's done some fantastic chairing of some very important meetings where we've really gone into a lot of detail about how this project will go, will move forward, and it's really exciting to see it. I think it's an incredibly important project. It's incredibly important for the area, and I'm really proud that as the working group has managed to build in, is a really strong focus on community engagement, on residents, and also seeking out residents from various different backgrounds spread out across the entire area, so that we really make sure that this project is driven by people with that lived experience in Hartcliffe who know the area and know what they want for their area. Because from the very beginning, we've always said this is something that should be done, that should be driven by Hartcliffe and not something that's done to them, as I think sometimes the area so often feels like it is. So I'm actually going to be passing over to Andrew Brown, because we had an arm wrestle and he got the board spot over me. But obviously myself and Tim will still be very enthusiastic about being involved where we can be from our position, although Andrew will be our person on the board. But I just really want to thank the officers that have really helped support this project and got it to the place where it is now.
Just briefly, though, I think it's that general sense, and I acknowledge that, well, Hartcliffe and Avon have had this much in common, I think, and you tell me if I'm wrong, but it's been described to me as places that only ever have things taken away from them, rather than having something given to them. And I appreciate that's been going on for far too long in both cases, and perhaps, regardless of our political affiliations on this one, we can unite in the sense of let's give back to those communities rather than taking away from them.
Totally agree. Kevin.
I'm going to hear it first now. Noel Wester congratulating people from Hartcliffe, basically, on getting a massive investment. No, seriously, it's absolutely needed. I mean, in some respects, though, there is still something systemic about actually what we need to do in terms of linking up jobs for places like Hartcliffe, Noel West, Avonmouth, and others to really good quality jobs, and ultimately, this investment's fantastic and a real opportunity for Hartcliffe to do some interesting things. I mean, if you've been around long enough, and I've been around long enough, the last Labour government brought in a new deal for communities that Barton Hill benefited from, and that was £25 million. And so Labour governments do have a history in providing, good amounts of money into these communities. But I think what we perhaps still need to do is push the case for us as a city to offer really good quality jobs for these communities, regardless of gifts that we get from governments, which are very beneficial and fantastic, but we need to do so much more in terms of our economy and these jobs.
Yes, it is a valid point, and I think we should also we're talking about pride in place, obviously, for a very clear reason. But there's also a separate operation called Pride of Place, which I always usually annoy the deputy leader by referring to PIP and POP. So PIP, Pride in Place, is the money we're getting from the Labour government. POP is another set of activity is taking place in South Bristol, which is bringing businesses into the area and seeing investment from the businesses, which what we're doing is working with those guys so that what they do complements what the Pride in Place funding is doing. And then I think there's a wider issue which, and it's obviously, because I grew up in the area, I have a specific concern about what's happened in Hartcliffe, but as you said, I'm also half a Noah Wester, because my mum's a Noah Wester, so we've also seen Noah West, Lawrence Weston, Southmead, Hillfields. There are multiple areas well, and Lawrence Hill, Barton Hill. What my vision is that we're working together, that we find a way not to drag people down so that we go like that, is to bring people up so everybody has the opportunity, the same access ability, the same time and the same ability and ambition as anybody else in the city, so that wherever you grow up in the city, you can think, and not just think, but actually have the opportunity to do whatever you want to do as your career. And I think that's something I think everybody in this committee would agree with, I think. I hope. Councillor Mack, who was on the selection committee.
Yeah, I was just going to reflect on that. I was lucky enough to have a day doing the selection committee, and it was really hard, which is a great sign when there's a number of really good candidates. Might have been a surprise to some who it came out with. There were 3 residents on the panel and me and Karen Smith, so I think it was very good that it was outnumbered by residents, so it was not determined by the politicians there. Yeah, really tough decision. And one of the things that I said, and the reason I supported and Paul came out on top, was I think it's really, really important that that panel has the power to take control of this funding from the council. And that's what I said to them, because, we can get so excited by this sort of funding, and there are so many ideas and so many things that people in this building know that money could be spent on. And I think the community want to hear all of those, and they want the proposals. But I thought it was really important to empower that residents committee and to go and grab that power from the council. And I don't know Paul very well, but I was pretty convinced in that interview that he has the power to do that. So yeah, that's. But I think the rest of that residents panel is also going to be really, really important, bringing a variety of views in there, and I'm sure Sarah will keep them focused on that too.
Okay, thank you. I'm conscious of time, and I know we're due for a toilet break after this item. So what I'm going to recommend is that I move that the Committee for Strategy and Resources approves acceptance of the Arcliff programme and up to £20 million funding over 10 years from the Pride in Place programme via MHCOG. 2, agrees the City Council will be the accountable body for the Arcliff Pride in Place programme. 3, authorises the Executive Director for Growth and Regeneration, in consultation with the Executive Director for Adults and Communities where required, to act as the Council's representative as the accountable body, to take all steps required to accept, administer and release Pride in Place funding in accordance with decisions of the Neighbourhood Board, and to enter into any grant agreements required by MHCOG to give effect to the programme's priorities and allocations as determined by the Neighbourhood Board. And finally, 4, authorises the Executive Director for Growth and Regeneration, in consultation with the Executive Director for Adults and Communities and the Chair of the Strategy and Resources Committee, to take all steps required to agree and finalise the terms of reference for the Neighbourhood Board, following engagement with local stakeholders in sworn alignment with MHCOG Pride in Place governance requirements. Can I ask for a seconder for that?
Very happy to second.
Thank you, Sarah. All those in favour, please raise your hands. That's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, what I suggest we do is we take a 10-minute break and come back. Well, I'll give you 12 minutes because I'm feeling generous. So you come back at 3:25. Okay, welcome back, everybody. We're now going to move on to the final 4 items. So agenda item 11 is procurement of post-mortem pathology services to His Majesty's Senior Coroner for Avon. I'd like to advise the committee that this report asks that the committee notes the formalising of arrangements for administering payments to pathologists appointed by His Majesty's Senior Coroner for Avon. The arrangements will allow a contract record and audit trail for internal procurement and financial governance purposes to be maintained so that payments to pathologists are administered transparently and in line with corporate requirements. This report is for information only, and I'd like to invite Yvonne Dawes, Head of Statutory Registration, and John Pitchers, Service Manager of Mortuary and Coroner Support, of who I think Avon is now going to tell me it's somebody else.
Okay, good afternoon, councillors. Good afternoon, Chair. Thank you. Yes, so as Councillor Dyer stated, HM Senior Coroner for Avon appoints the pathologists. So the Avon Coroner works across 4 council areas, so Bristol, North Somerset, South Gloucester, Bath and North East Somerset. We all pay a contribution to the work that's done by the coroner, and that's on a population basis, and for Bristol that's 40% of the costs. So the coroner is an independent office holder. So we are simply the funder. We do not direct what she does or what her other coroners do. So she makes the decisions about which histopathologists or Home Office registered forensic pathologists, because we are a public and a forensic mortuary. So Bristol takes the lead on behalf of the other 4 councils for the running of the mortuary at Flaxbourton and for support to the coroner, and there are courts there as well. So we don't play a role in her decision on who the pathologists are or influence that. However, the fees to them are paid through Bristol City Council, as are we pay the salaries of the coroners as well, and we pay for the court. So that is why you're seeing this report at the moment. So there is a set fee for pathologists, but it has never been updated. It's in legislation, and there is a shortage of pathologists. And as a result of that, the Senior Coroner for Avon asked the 4 authorities, would we please increase the amount paid for the postmortems to reflect what is happening nationally, and in order to still be able to carry on, that is what we did. And the fee was increased from £250 per postmortem to £450. So that increased then from 23-24, an expenditure of £223,000 to what we looked at in 25-26, which is £420. Hence why you're seeing this now, because the amounts of money being paid to pathologists is much larger. So there is no formal contractual arrangement between us and the senior coroner, because she is an independent office holder, she is a judge, and separation of those decisions, and she appoints the pathologists. But there is, because we pay the pathologists, our legal advisors advise us that there is an implied contract between the council and the pathologists. We have a pool of 8 pathologists who provide this service in Avon. And so because that's quite a small number of people and quite a large amount of money, in order to make sure that we are adhering to appropriate financial regulations, that's why we're bringing it in front of you today. So the total cost of that $420,000 to Bristol is $168,000 of that. But we are the lead authority, so when making decisions in relation to funding the coroner. We are making them on behalf of all 4 of the councils. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. Tom.
Thanks for this. This is just a quick question with regards to the increased fees. I can understand the logic behind this. Is this similarly practiced in other authorities? Has there been similar agreements made?
Yeah, I think we were about the lowest paying in the whole country prior to this, so we hung on as long as possible.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Gotcha.
It's just a note for interest. Do you know how many times we make use of the coroners? Not the coroners, the pathologists?
Yeah, we carry out about 1,200 post-mortems per annum. So about 40% of the deaths, it's slightly lower now, about 38% of the people who are sent to the coroner for investigation, their deaths to be investigated. That investigation extends to an autopsy in about 38% of cases. So yes, it's a large number of autopsies. We're a very busy mortuary.
Any more questions or comments? Okay. In that case, I would like to recommend, well, this report is just for information, so can I just ask the committee to note the report as per the recommendations? Thank you. Thanks, Yvonne. We'll now move on to agenda item number 12, which is why Yvonne's not moving out of her seat, because this is her as well. Electoral Services Specialist Printing Procurement. This report seeks approval to procure an Electoral Services Specialist Technical Printing for election and canvas printing. The current contract expiry is on 16th of February 2027, and the estimated value of the contract is £3,614,000, excluding VAT. This is a key decision because obviously it involves a spend of over £500,000. So Yvonne, in your role as Head of Statutory Registration, can you briefly outline the report?
Okay, so electoral printing is highly specialist printing, and there's only a small number of printers in the country that carry out this printing. And what they have to do is they have to make sure that they are complying with legislation. So when legislation changes, they will brief these printers, the MHCLG will brief these printers and tell them what needs to change, because electoral service is highly prescribed, by legislation as to what we do in order to ensure equal treatment. They have the ability to extract and manipulate data from our election software. The things that we ask them to do that are not straightforward printing are ballot papers, multi-part voting packs with envelopes, and the annual canvass forms and notices. So we do not offer this in-house. It is not technology or knowledge that we hold in-house in our print and post contracts. And as I said, there are only a small amount of these printers. And the other thing that they need to guarantee is that they can actually deliver with short notice, because we're not only printing these items for elections which are known. So the date of the local council election in 2028 is known. The date of the next parliamentary election is less known. If a parliamentary election were to be called with no notice, then we need to be ready, and the printers need to be ready. And they need to show that they have adequate contingency, and that they are, as I said, up to date with current legislation. So the contract will start in February next year until February 2031. And that ensures, because we're now all out elections for local council, and we know when the next combined authority mayor election is, and we know with the deadline for the next parliamentary election, then we need to make sure that we have the printers in place to be there to deliver the printing that we need. And the contract that we're asking you to delegate for us to implement will be based on previous contracts for electoral service specialist print. So as Councillor Dyer mentioned, this is £3.6 million contract, but not all of it is funded by the council, and that's to do with the way that elections are funded. So the council pays for 100% of a local council election. We have currently a police and crime commissioner, and that police and crime commissioner election was combined with our local elections, and the funding for the police and crime commissioner came from central government. This post is being abolished, and as a result of that, our local elections will stand alone, and Bristol City Council will now be paying 100% of the cost. So where we had combined polling stations, combined staff training, all sorts of things that we could do where we could divide the cost between us as a council and nationally, that is no longer possible. So 100% for the local election. And then we have the combined authority mayor, which is paid 100% by the combined authority. And for a parliamentary election, that is paid by central government. So really, although you're seeing very large numbers here in terms of 3.6 million, that not all of it is funded by Bristol City Council. Now, those of you who've looked at this in great detail might have spotted that for the parliamentary elections, it appears to be slightly more expensive cost, and that is because we are running the election. Our parliamentary constituencies, as they currently exist, the 5th parliamentary constituency goes into South Gloucestershire. So the overall cost of running that election, running those polling stations, we as Bristol run that because we're the larger part of that parliamentary constituency, and so we will be claiming back a larger part from central government. So the burden is not the funding in that case, it's just that we are organising it. Okay, this contract allows us to fulfil our statutory duties. Okay, it's also about the annual canvass, which is obviously linked to elections, but every year we're making sure that our register of electors is up to date, current and correct, and that people have the opportunity to exercise their democratic right correctly, as well as printing of ballot papers. So there's various printing in relation to the forms that are sent to households and to individuals during the annual canvass. Okay. The other elections that we may be required to run as a city council are neighbourhood planning referenda, and we do run those from time to time, and also council tax referenda if you as councillors were to ask us to run that because you're looking for larger amounts on council tax. So shall I let you read out what is that? That's what you would normally do, is to read out what you're asking us to do. Yeah, what you're being asked. Thank you.
Thank you. So what we're going to be asked to do is there's one procurement recommendation, which would be to approve the procurement of the council's specialist print services for 4 years from the current contract end date. And there's two contractual recommendations. number 1 authorises the Director of Leader in Democratic Services, in consultation with myself as Chair, to take all the steps required to procure and award the Electoral Service Specialist printing contract. And the second one authorises the Director of Leader in Democratic Services to invoke any subsequent extensions or variations. I will read those out again in more detail when we go to the vote, but in the meantime, does anybody have any questions or comments? Kelvin and then John.
Thank you, Chair. So support very much the recommendations, and I have a lot of dealings with these 2 women officers over there. I have quite a lot of support for the work they do. I guess the question for me is, though, how do we monitor the contract to ensure that whoever comes forward have the capacity to do what we want them to do at what will be, presumably, a pretty busy time for them, because they may have contracts elsewhere, and that was the only question I had about this issue.
Okay, so we have regular meetings with the supplier, and we have very specific performance indicators in the contract, and they are very, very specific, actually. And, you know, we meet with them and make sure that they are adhering to them absolutely to the letter, because this is not something that we could do tomorrow.
John.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Yvonne, for your report, which is very clear. It's a personal curiosity, really. I understand that we do have to use a specialist printer. It's the same with banknotes. De La Rue print them for the Bank of England, and it's all very secure and all the rest of it. Same with this, because this is very important for democracy. Are there a number of these companies? And if so, is any of these companies based locally?
Yes, there are companies that are based locally, and we could, you know, the procurement rules in Bristol City Council look at local suppliers. You know, that's something we're interested in. It would be particularly beneficial for us, because one of the things we do in terms of checks and balances that Councillor Blake was talking about is that we actually go to their factories and we check prior to issuing of postal votes that they've been correctly printed, and we take samples. So the more local, the better for us as well.
Councillor Annie Townsend.
Hi, thanks. Well, firstly, thanks for this and also all the work you do in electoral services, because I know it's a massive piece of work whenever you've got to do it. I was just wondering, because young people from the age of 16 will hopefully be able to vote in the next general election, will there be a piece of work communicating that enthusiastically to young people, and does that come under this budget, or would that be under something else?
There certainly will be. There will nationally be, if this legislation is passed, which we then there definitely will be both both national promotion and locally. We've already spoken with the Youth Select Committee about promoting it, and we'll also be promoting it in schools. And we're attending lots of meetings with the Association of Electoral Administrators, who are advising us about appropriate ways, because there are other issues like data, protection for younger people as well. So yes, it will be a full, guns blazing attempt to make sure everyone who could be on the electoral register is on the electoral register.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Tom.
Thank you, and thanks for the answer to that question, because I hadn't thought of that. That's a really good point, so I just wanted to say thanks to Andy for raising that. Just on the point on 12, the specification of this print only includes a social value element. The contract will be required to provide voluntary activity, additional community benefits, so on and so forth. Do we have a criteria in place or kind of a preference for what that looks like, or is it just they have to include one and we accept it no matter what it is? Just a little bit more detail on that would be welcome.
Well, the council procurement team do have a social value team that look at this specifically and monitor what is happening with social value. But we would ask them to make a proposal to us as part of their attempt to be procured by us as part of the tender process, and then we would evaluate that, and that would be given a weighting. So it would absolutely be part of the contractual tendering process and subsequent monitoring process.
Could you explain just in a little bit more detail on what that weighting would look like in practice?
Yeah, we haven't got to that stage yet of actually weighting it. I don't know whether there's a set amount for the council that weights social value.
I think it's up to 20%.
Yeah, 20% was what was in my head, and Paul has just confirmed that.
Okay, thanks. That's worth knowing. Just might be something for us to keep an eye on, I think.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay, in that case, I would like to move that the Strategy and Resources Policy Committee, 1, approves the procurement of the Council's specialist print services for 4 years from the current contract end date of 16th of February 2027 at a cost of up to £3,614,000, excluding VAT, of which Bristol City Council's proportion is expected to be not more than £2,077,000, excluding VAT. Also to approve the following contractual elements: to authorise the Director of Legal and Democratic Services, in consultation with the Chair of the Strategy and Resources Committee, to take all steps required to procure and award Electoral Services Specialist Printing Contract in line with the procurement routes and maximum budget outlined in this report. Secondly, authorise the Director of Legal and Democratic Services to invoke any subsequent extensions, variations specifically defined in the contracts being awarded up to the maximum budget outlined in this report. Can I ask for a seconder?
Seconded.
Thank you. All those in favour, please raise your hands. That's passed unanimously. Thank you, Yvonne. We now move on to agenda item 13, which is the 25-26 PTRO Finance Provisional Outturn report. This report presents the information and analysis to the Strategy and Resources Committee on the Council's financial performance against the approved budget and its forecast use of resources for the financial year 25-26. This is a key decision because it involves a spend of over £500,000 and impacts 2 or more wards. I would like to invite Stuart Booth, Head of Financial Planning, to briefly outline the report. Stuart.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for welcoming me into your chamber. This report presents the Council's Period 12 Provisional Outturn for 25-26 financial year for both revenue and capital, alongside the delivery of the Corporate Savings Programme. It provides assurance to you on the Council's financial performance at the year end and seeks the technical approvals required to support budget management and the progression into the final statement of accounts. As I say, this is provisional. Work continues on the statutory close to prepare the statutory accounts for the Council. The final statement of accounts will include a full reconciliation between this provisional report and the final audited position that's presented from our auditors. With regard to the key headlines, with regard to General Fund, at period 12, the General Fund is provisionally reporting a full year underspend of 0.2 million against a final budget for the year of £597.9 million. This closing position represents a significant improvement from that was presented in period 10, when an overspend of 7.2 million was forecast. This improvement has been driven by work across the second half of the year to implement recovery plans and mitigations across service directorates, as well as recovery work to hold in corporate inflation and corporate contingency budgets from the use to manage the overall position of the Council. Whilst the overall budget is largely being achieved, there are some underlying pressures on service areas, the key ones being highlighted within the report, and most notably children's and education services, where there is a £14.5 million outturn overspend, which reflects the increased numbers of children entering care, the increased cost of those placements, in particular those that are placed with external providers. Other notable areas of concern and pressures that we need to keep an eye on moving forward are adult social care and assets, infrastructure and property. With regard to savings delivery at period 12, savings of £55 million were delivered against the General Fund and the HRA, representing a 93% delivery against the combined total savings requirement of £59.3 million. This represents a significant improvement from the period 10 position that was forecast, where we were projecting an 85% delivery rate. This improvement is largely due to improved savings delivery in the adult and communities area, combined with the mitigation and delivery of improvements linked to the recovery work across the wider council. £6.9 million of savings are expected to be rolled forward into the 26-27 financial year, reflecting schemes where delivery has been delayed rather than removed. Moving on to ring-fenced accounts. Firstly, the HRA. The HRA is reporting a provisional full-year surplus of £5.9 million, of 4% against a closing budget of £154.6 million. This represents a £6.4 million improvement versus the 0.5 deficit forecast at period 10. However, we still have to provide for period 13 transactions as part of closing the accounts. We still have technical adjustments which will largely impact upon our reserves, contributions to and from, and also finalising the capital financing of the capital programme within the HRA. The expectation as a result of those adjustments is that we will bring back to a position of £0.5 million overspend, which is in line with where we were at period 10. With regard to the dedicated schools grant, we're reporting a provisional deficit of £44.7 million, representing a £1.7 million deterioration since period 10, driven by continued high needs pressures, top-ups and increased placement volumes. The brought forward DSG deficit of £62.6 million, plus the in-year figure that I've just given you of 44.7, combines to produce a £107.3 million deficit carry forward on the DSG deficit reserve into 26-27. At the close of the year, the General Fund holds a £21.9 million reserve linked to the DFE safety valve agreement, and work continues to progress our existing deficit management plan under the safety valve programme into a new action plan required by the DFE under the changes announced in the local government finance settlement to fund historic deficits at 90%. Public health, we're reporting a break-even position against the £43.1 million budget, which is unchanged from period 10. The Harbour Authority is again reporting a break-even position against its budget of £4.1 million, unchanged from period 10. With regard to our regulatory income, which is a key dependency for the Council in terms of how it funds its budget, Council tax performance collection stands at period 12 at 93.5% of the in-year budget requirement, which is marginally lower than the previous year's in-year collection rate of 94%. However, the arrears collection has exceeded expectations, and we are 69% ahead of target on that area. With regard to business rates, collection stands at 96.9%, which is marginally higher marginally higher of the in-year collection than in the previous year of 96.7. Again, arrears collection has exceeded expectations, and we're 57% ahead of target. And finally, if I may, capital programme, Outturn. A difficult programme for most local authorities in terms of delivery, and Bristol is not exempt from that. The Outturn stands at £282.7 million against a revised 25-26 budget of £347.6 million. To note, the prior year final Outturn for 24-25 was £269 million. So we're trying to deliver more than we have done year on year, and we've still got areas to improve in terms of that delivery as we move forward into the 26-27 financial year and the new MTFP. This represents an underspend of £64.9 million, comprising £43.2 million on the General Fund, £20 million on the HRA and £1.7 million on the Harbour Authority. This underspend and some 26-27 budgets will require reprofiling as we move into the 26-27 years. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Stuart. Open it up for questions and comments. I've got Patrick, John, Tom, and then Heather. So, Patrick.
Thank you very much indeed, Stuart, for that presentation. Again, I think this is a positive report in large part. It shows that a lot of the controls that this administration has brought in over the last couple of years are working and paying off, particularly in our demand-led areas, although there are continual challenges with the children and young people remit, which I think we all know the difficulties that we have there, and as well with adult social care as well. I am curious, just out of interest, do you know when the last time the council recorded an underspend on its general fund was, please?
Advising me that it might have been last year.
Oh, it's not. Yeah, yes, of course. Was that after adjustments, maybe? Okay. All right, thank you then. And then I did just want to ask, please, with the creation of the reserves, which is detailed in the report, could we just get an idea of what some of those are for? I think Temple Island B&G is pretty self-explanatory. It's some of the other ones, unfunded leisure liabilities, or the S256 prevention reserve. These are fairly large amounts of money that we're putting away into pots, and I'm sure there's good reasons for it, but it would be good to understand that in more detail, please.
I think it would be easy for me to take that away and provide you with a detailed list of the purpose for each of those funds that have been identified, as whether it be general or earmarked reserves.
Thank you very much. That would be very helpful.
John.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Stuart, for your presentation. I wonder if I could just focus in on one aspect, and that's the DSG, which keeps a lot of us awake at night for obvious reasons, given the size of the figures. Now, the government are looking to write off 90% of that debt, which would be fantastic, but there are some hurdles that we have to meet in order to get the government's acquiescence in so doing. Are you confident that we will meet those hurdles?
I think I will struggle to answer that one, Councillor, at this point in time, because I'm not involved in that area of work. If I could defer to the Chief Executive.
Yeah, Nick, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Are we confident? Yes, we are confident. We're not complacent, but we are confident. We, as part of the reforms that government have proposed, which are welcome, we need to submit a local send reform plan by, I think, the 18th of June. Just seeing if I can check the dates, and therefore we are coming forward to the next meeting of this committee to give you oversight of that plan. As part of preparing that plan, we have already done a lot of work in relation to the DSG, particularly in relation to our safety valve arrangements. And in preparing that plan, we've also been taking advice from other councils so that we have some peer review and challenge in the quality of that plan. It is an important plan because it's a prerequisite to unlocking the 90% funding of the deficit, which is proposed by government.
I think I'll just add my one comment is we have been working very closely with the DFE in terms of the work we've been doing on the safety valve and what they're looking for in terms of us meeting the criteria. And I think we are in a very good position. I'm reasonably confident, but like Nick, not complacent because, I mean, same as you, the DSG is the area that has been keeping me up late at night because of the large numbers. But, I think it's good that the government have come in with a solution that actually recognises the financial problems that local authorities are experiencing. But I still think we still have to have a solution about the ongoing delivery, and that the DFE are going to step in and take over a lot of that, which I think will relieve the pressure, not just here in Bristol, but right across the country, because it is a tremendous problem. And I think I had Tom there.
Yeah, thank you. There's a few kind of strands of thought, so bear with me here as I kind of go here, there, and everywhere. I think, one, very good to hear on the council tax side, good to hear on debt management. Once again, remain very impressed by the hard work of the team in particular, because I think that is helping our financial position. Two, definitely agree with the DSG situation. Glad to hear that we are not being complacent about it, because I think there are still some worries. The third thing I would note is that while I agree there are some positives in here, I think Councillor McAllister and I might have slightly different views of what constitutes positive news. We do have some movement, but it seems as though some of our savings are being offset by greater overspends in the same areas. So I'm a little bit wary about this. Maybe I'm misreading that, and you might be able to comment, but I am a little bit concerned if some of these savings are either being balanced out by overspends or are leading to those overspends. I don't know whether or not it's possible for you to comment on that point.
I think Nick would like to come on that point.
So I think we've analysed both where we've delivered savings and as Stuart had said, the delivery of savings has been positive this year, but also where there's overspends, and they are by and large in different parts of the system. So if I was to take children's social care, where there is probably the most significant budget pressure, the savings have been delivered, and we've done work to quantify and to validate that they've been delivered. They were significantly in the areas of where we were stepping down families to children in need into placements that were either returning them to their family or into placements that were within the area, and that was the plan. However, we have seen an increase in demand of people coming into the system, which was not an area for savings, and you will see that as we come forward to this year's budget, that the focus increasingly is on preventing children from becoming in need in the first place, rather than providing them with better forms of care once they are children in need. So that's just an example of where you can deliver the savings, but the demand and the pressure upon services remains.
And I do have some sympathy on the amount of demand that we see in that regard, but it is still a concern from the perspective of our finances. So, but glad to hear that we are taking due care and assessment on that. Similarly, I was, again, I suspect this is more of my misreading anything else, but noting the general fund forecast overspend, so this is point 4 on page 130 of the pack, was various low-level improvements across committees, in addition to the significant release of 10.3 million from strategy and resources corporate budgets relating to reduction in capital financing spend, in line with forecast capital expenditure reductions, plus the drawdown of unutilised corporately held pay and contract inflation budgets. Now, I'm reading that, and my reading is inflation wasn't as bad as it could have been, so we're in a slightly better financial position rather than anything else. But again, if you can clarify on that, I'm not misreading.
I think that's part of the answer. The other part is that, you know, a lot of services will have managed to contain their spend within their budgets, and therefore, you know, they've been able to absorb the inflation rather than there being a need to via up the corporate inflation budget to them. So a bit of both, I would suggest.
A bit of both, but that is probably more positive than I would read it, so fair enough. Thank you for clarifying on that. And last, but certainly not least...
just because related to that as well is that was the corporate contingency that previously there had been something called optimism bias, and that optimism bias was spread around the department. What we did was we changed that to having a more centralised corporate contingency, which could only be assessed once you'd done a recovery plan about how you were going to recover the overspends you had. So that's where that corporate contingency comes from as well, Tom.
Thanks for the reminder, I appreciate that. And so last point is simply on the capital underspend, which I think remained, and I appreciate that remains a problem for a number of councils, but it is still concerning, particularly when it may lead to further problems down the line on our housing delivery, which has, I will be diplomatic, had certain structural pressures as a result of choices made by this council. I'm saying that as diplomatically as I possibly can, and so it remains a point of concern. So if that is something we can look at with a very scrupulous eye, I think that would be a good point for both this committee and for officers.
I think it's point noted, and yes, there is a focus and a keen eye on capital programme delivery and delivering the ambition that we put into those programmes.
And just to add a further comment on that, because this is a long-standing problem, and one of the things I identified was that if you look at city councils like Manchester and Leeds, they tend to deliver within 5% of their capital budgets. In Bristol, consistently year after year after year, it's been more like 15 to 20%. What I will say is part of the problem with some of those underspends on capital are not because the projects are not going to be delivered, but because of delays. And what I've asked Andy and his team to look at is where it's the delay is due to decisions made at our end, that's fine, but I think what we also need to identify is where the delays are because of decisions not being made at central government or in a particular department at the moment or elsewhere. And I think we need to separate that so we know which areas we can concentrate on and make significant differences. And in terms of the HRA, yes, we did make the decision to focus more of our HRA spend, in particular on ensuring that the homes that people lived in were being worked upon to deliver a response to the regulator of social housing judgment we got, because I think we all agree that our council tenants need to have decent homes to live in, as well as building new homes. We can argue about the balance between how far you go one side and one the other, but I think we want to do both. But there is a political decision that how far you go one way and how far you go the other.
I think that, you know, and again, I will try and be diplomatic about this. I think there is a political decision there, and it's where we draw the line is something to discuss, but I think it would be remiss not to at least consider whether decisions around what we did with the pipeline of upcoming housing then has implications for that for housing further down the line being delivered, which I think we're seeing.
Patrick, no, Heather.
I've been advised that might not be the best idea at this point.
Heather, do you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to reflect. I'm going to go on to the positive, reflecting the savings. I actually was on holiday when this was first read, and Tony was incredibly good and did no work-related messages to me at all apart from this. He's like, 93% but savings delivery. And I was like, okay, I'll accept that as a work message. That's about all I'm on. And so I looked backwards, and I looked back the last year of the previous administration, we were on 67% savings delivery, and that was the best of the 5 years running up to that. So if we look at where we are going and the difficulties of getting there, you know, one of the things that I was hearing earlier this year was some of those cost recovery and the difficulties when we're saying anything over £500 needs to go through a panel and a process. And those steps are difficult, and they are difficult when you're doing them, but it does also seem like doing those steps starts to, you know, over the time, starts to change that culture where we were being far more careful on everything that's spending, far more focused on those savings. And I think it's incredible to have gone, can I do the maths, 26% increase in savings delivery over a couple of years. And I think that also reflects, you know, there's things around that about how we are operating as a council that was also picked up in the CPC report. So, yeah, well done to all the officers. I think that focus on making sure that those budgets are under control means that we now have that flexibility to determine how we want to spend money, not just be reacting to the things that we can't, the budgets that we can't control. So, yeah, thank you to everyone who's involved in that. But, yeah, it's a really positive sign.
Okay, on that positive note, I'm going to move to the next item. Not the next item, but I'm going to move to the recommendations. So we have 11 items to note and 9 items to approve. So bear with me while I take a swig of water. So I'd like to ask the committee to note the following items. 1, the Council's General Fund forecast outturn revenue position of a £0.2 million underspend against the budget. 2, the performance on delivery of savings as summarised in Appendix A1A and detailed in Appendix A2. 3, the Council's outturn position of £5.9 million underspend within the housing revenue account before the contribution of capital receipts to the funding of capital investment. The HRA will balance its in-year closing position through the HRA General Reserve. 4, the Council's outturn position of a £44.7 million overspend in a dedicated SCURS grant, and that this brings the carry-forward deficit to £107.3 million. 5, the break-even position on public health services. 6, the break-even position on the Bristol Harbour Fund. 7, the Council's underspend of £64.9 million against the capital programme revised budget for 2025-26, comprised of a £43.2 million underspend on the General Fund and a £20 million underspend on the HRA, plus a £1.7 million underspend on the Bristol Harbour account. 8, the in-year collection levels for council tax and business rates as set out in Section 8 of Appendix A1A. 9, the level of A's debt as at 31st of March 2025 as set out in Section 10 of Appendix A1A. 10, the use of reserves and draft closing reserve balances as set out in Section 11 in Appendix A1A. And finally, 11, the drawdown of £5.8 million of flexible use of capital receipts to support funding of the capital programme. Can I ask the committee to note the report as per those recommendations? Thank you. I'd now like to recommend that the committee approves 1, the transfer to or drawdown from the General Fund Reserve in order to balance the outturn position following the final statement of accounts. 2, the transfer to or drawdown from the HRA Reserve in order to balance the outturn position following the final statement of accounts. 3, the transfer of the DSG in-year deficit to the DSG Reserve following the final statement of accounts. 4, the creation of the following new reserves: Temper Island BNG 1.6 million, Staying Close 0.1 million, unfunded leisure liabilities 0.3 million, Southwest Regional Emergency Mortuary Asset 0.1 million, S256 Prevention and S117 Cost Pressures £5 million, South Bristol Youth Guarantee 0.1 million, UK SPF surplus 0.1 million, NDTI ring fence funding 0.1 million, parking renewers pay and display 0.3 million. 5, the reprofiling of up to 64.9 million of the capital programme 25-26 underspend into future years, and the reprofiling of the capital programme's 26-27 approved budget into future years. 6, the release of 49.1 million corporate funds, including 13.3 million for inflation, 12.3 million for pay awards, 11.8 million optimism bias, and 4.3 million savings contingency and other contingencies. Yeah, that's it, sorry. Number 7, the allocation of £1.650 million capital for the 5-year period to fund the Library Material Fund dedicated to other services libraries to spend. 8, the allocation of £15.3 million strategic community infrastructure levy to individual capital projects will be approved by the relevant committees, including allocating the SCIL to projects set out in the Harbour Capital Projects report presented to Harbour Committee on the 17th of March 2026. And 9, the planned financial reporting timetable for 2026-27. My apologies for the slight hesitation there, as there was a misspelling in the middle of that, which completely put me off. So can I ask for a seconder for...
Seconded.
Thank you. Can I ask for all those to vote in favour to show their hands? That's passed unanimously. Thank you all very much. Okay, agenda item number 14 is the corporate catering and events contract update. Before we move on to this item, I am going to request that we take a short 5-minute break. And I would like the members of the committee to accompany me to have a brief discussion. We will be back in 5 minutes. Okay, thank you for returning. So agenda item 14, corporate catering events contract update. I understand we have a motion from the floor.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, obviously the catering contract is quite complex and there are a lot of questions that we still have outstanding. So what I'm proposing is that we actually defer this until the next Strategy and Resources Committee meeting so we can consider the questions, submit some of them in advance, which might then shape the report. So that's my suggestion.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask all those in favour of the motion to defer, please raise your hands. Thank you. All those against, please raise your hands. Any abstentions? So that's 5 in favour, 3 against and 1 abstention. So the corporate catering events contract update is deferred into the next meeting of the Strategy and Resources Committee. That was the last item on the agenda, so I would like to thank everyone for their attendance, and we will now close this meeting, and if I don't see you before the next Strategy and Resources Committee, enjoy the summer.